If the business I'm engaged to sell is worth $900,000 and the tangible assets, the equipment of that business is also worth $900,000, how do I advise my client, the seller? Now, that was the content of an email we received from a colleague several years ago. And the answer hinges on a couple of considerations, not least being what's in the best interest of the client, the seller. I'm Joe Caffrey, the president of Worldwide Business Brokers, a company that I founded back in 2001. And in this video, the second on the value of a business's assets, we discuss the impact of those assets on the value when selling a business. This story really begins when, in anticipation of selling, the owner of a small manufacturing company contacted a broker, business broker, who has gone through our training. And as we teach, the broker analyzed the business's financials and calculated that the business's discretionary earnings on an annual basis over the past couple of years had averaged about $300,000. So using some databases that we advise on, he discovered that similar businesses have sold over the past couple of years at a multiple of 3 times their discretionary earnings. So we applied this 3 times multiple to the discretionary earnings of the business he's valuing and arrived at an estimated value of $900,000. Now, the seller, over the previous 3 or 4 years, had acquired a bunch of new equipment for his manufacturing line, and he thought the physical assets of the business would be worth valuing. So he contacted an appraiser. The appraiser's report came back showing that the value of the tangible assets, the equipment of his business, was also $900,000. So the seller went back to the broker and said, "What do I do? How should I proceed here?" This was the situation that our colleague contacted us about and wanted to know what he should do and how he should advise his client. Now, our advice was that there seemed to be 2 options here, both of which would, in theory, result in a $900,000 transaction. First option, sell the business, which of course includes all the assets. Second option, sell the assets and close the business. Let's look at option number 1. First, consider that selling a properly priced business generally takes between 6 and 12 months of solid marketing efforts. Let's assume that the business sold for its value, $900,000. Let's further assume that the cost of selling, closing costs such as attorney's fees, accounting fees, some transfer fees, and don't forget the commission for the broker, totaled about $100,000. This option would appear to result in a net for the seller of about $800,000, but it might take a year to get that result. Option number 2, on the other hand, selling the assets for their appraised value of $900,000, would seem theoretically to net the seller $900,000, but in far less time, 60 to 90 days perhaps. But in the realm of business ownership transfers, assets, tangible assets, often have 2 values: in-place value and relocated value, and it's very important to understand the difference between the 2. In-place value would be where the buyer is going to use the assets where they are. In this case, they would be worth the appraised value of $900,000. Relocated value, on the other hand, must be considered if the buyer is going to relocate the assets before using them, because there's a cost associated with that. Now, in the case of our colleague's dilemma, his client was a small manufacturer of metal components out in western Colorado. If the eventual buyer was going to reuse those assets right where they were, they would presumably pay the appraised value of the assets of $900,000. However, if the buyer is headquartered in Texas and plans to move the acquired assets to their new facility outside of Houston, there's a new set of calculations that has to be considered, because the assets in question are going to be worth $900,000 wherever they're set up. If that's in Texas, the cost of relocating them has got to be considered. If being moved to Texas, the equipment must be disassembled, crated up, loaded onto trucks, and hauled from Denver to Houston, where it must be unloaded, moved into the new facility, uncrated, reassembled, and brought back online. If the process of breaking down the equipment in Colorado, trucking it to Texas, reassembling it, cost $200,000, the relocated value of the assets would be roughly $700,000 in Denver. So the answer to our colleague's question, how to advise his client, depends on the answers to two other questions. First, what is the relocated value of these tangible assets? And second, what is the likelihood that the assets will be relocated? Well, neither of those questions can be answered until a buyer materializes. But these options have got to be presented this way to the seller. That is our fiduciary responsibility. So our advice to the broker was to advise his seller, his client, that there are these two options. One, sell the business for $900,000 and walk away with around $800,000 in 10, 12 months. Two, sell the assets to a local user and walk away with $900,000 in 60 to 90 days, or sell it to a remote user and walk away with something less than $900,000, but also in 60 to 90 days. In either case, the seller has to make the decision, but it's the broker's responsibility to explain this to him. So where does the broker end up on this? Well, I'm not sure what the outcome of that particular case was, but you can imagine that the broker had a strong motivation to list that business, because if he listed it and sold it for its value, he would be earning a very handsome $80,000 to $90,000 commission. So the bottom line here is that if you have an asset-heavy business, you might need two numbers. The first one you're going to need in any event, no matter what your business is, and that is the value of your business. What is your business worth? Hire a business broker who is a professional, or certainly one who is a certified business intermediary, a CBI. Find out what your business is likely worth in the market. It'll cost a couple of grand, but it is money well spent. If you own the equipment, if you bought the equipment, if you've owned this business for a while, started this business, you may have bought it all. You may have installed it. You have some idea what it's probably worth. So you may not need an appraisal, because if it's not worth anything near what the business is worth, there's no reason for the second number. But if you think that your business assets, your tangible assets, are worth something close to what the broker said the value of the business is, you might consider getting an asset appraisal, because at that point, you may have these two same options. So if you found this video helpful, hit that like button. That would certainly help us out. And if you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments box below. We'll answer every one of them. In the description box, you'll find a link to the first video that I mentioned earlier in this video, where we discuss the value of assets and how they relate to the value of a business. You'll also find several other links that will lead you to resources on valuing and selling businesses. So again, like this video if you would, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our future videos. And until that next video, Thanks for watching this one. I'll see you in the next video.